The committee meeting will come to order. We want to welcome our witnesses, Secretary Shanahan, Acting Secretary of Defense, Secretary Heather Wilson, Secretary of the Air Force, General Joseph Dunford, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and General John Hyten, Commander of the U.S. Strategic Command. Before we begin today's hearing, I'd like to provide special recognition to Secretary Wilson. Today is likely her last appearance before this committee as she's transitioning to her new position of President of the University of Texas, El Paso. And I spent about 20 years of my life down there, so I know what you're in for. And we'll miss you dearly. Your service to our country has been commendable. And first serving as the United States Air Force from '82 on, and as Congresswoman from 98 to 2009. And culminating as the 24th Secretary of the Air Force. We appreciate all of your service. We will miss you. I've got to applaud and thank both President Trump and Vice President Pence for their renewed focus and cohesive approach to America's resurgence in the space domain, and the support to our national defense strategy, this document here, which is our blueprint. The reestablishment of the National Space Council, chaired by the Vice President, has provided multiple space policy directives, including the establishment of the Unified Combatant Command and U.S. Space Command, as well as standing up the Space Development Agency and providing us with the United States Space Force proposal we are discussing today. Space is a warfighting domain, and future conflicts with Russia and China will invoke attacks from, in, and through space. This would profoundly disrupt our society, which is heavily dependent upon satellite communications, positioning, navigation, and timing, and other vital space-based technology. We must restore our margin of dominance in space over our adversaries. The President's leadership and continued attention to this space domain protects the freedom of action these great power competitors would like to disturb. And the unwavering presidential support we have received ensures our warfighters we have the technology and ability to bring America back to greatness in space. Today's hearing will provide us with an opportunity to continue to gather facts, to fully explore the proposal as presented to us. It was just only 4 weeks ago, if you remember, that was right after our budget discussion. And talking with members of the committee and their MLAs, we're all open-minded on the plan, but are wrestling with different aspects of it. And this is one of those rare times when we're having a hearing where people haven't already made up their minds. So we look forward to that. When we first heard about the proposal, I asked two simple questions. What will the organization fix, and how much will it cost? Now, I was going to say I have yet to get satisfactory answers on either one of these, but you have already talked about, it's come out of the administration, that this is going to be a $2 billion program. So for my purposes, I'm going to assume that's right, but I'm still waiting for the answer for the other question. So I look forward to talking about the options, the considerations. Another option could be making the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, the Space Office. I consider that would be a viable alternative. We'll be discussing these alternatives in the time to come. Since Senator Reid and I have concluded that since this is such a high visibility and there's so much interest in this, we're going to have, instead of 5-minute rounds, we're going to have 6-minute rounds, and we look forward to dealing with our committee members. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing to discuss the Department's proposal to establish a United States Space Force. Again, I think the timing is appropriate. The administration understands the different challenging demands in space that have evolved very quickly over the last few years, and their proposal gives us something to work with, and I thank them for that. Let me welcome our distinguished visitors and join the chairman in saluting and thanking Secretary Wilson for her distinguished service. Thank you, Madam Secretary. All of us would agree that space is essential to the security and progress of the United States. It is a critical component of almost every aspect of everyday life, from communications, financial transactions, and navigation to the weather. For decades, the United States enjoyed unfettered access to space. However, as near-peer competitors increase their space presence, space is becoming contested. Eventually, it could be a warfighting domain, and we must prepare accordingly. The question is how. There are legitimate concerns that the Department of Defense is not effectively organized to address the threats posed by our near-peer adversaries in space. Congress has grappled with how to address these concerns. In fact, in 2017, we debated a House proposal on whether or not to create a Space Corps. Ultimately, due to strong opposition in the Senate and questions from senior officials within the Department of Defense, Congress did not create a Space Corps. But we did strengthen the space cadre and space acquisition authorities within the Air Force, and specifically within the Air Force Space Command. Last year, Congress took an additional step and created a sub-unified command for space reporting to the U.S. Strategic Command. This year, the administration has proposed to establish the U.S. Space Force as a new military service within the Air Force, responsible for organizing, training, and equipping all forces who will fight in the space domain. The proposal is essentially the same House proposal we debated in 2017. I fully agree that the threat is real and that changes need to be made to better address the threat. However, creating a new branch of the armed forces for the first time in 70 years is not a decision Congress should make lightly. Such a major reorganization will have long-lasting consequences, both intended and unintended, for how our forces will fight the decades into the future. While the Department's proposal appears comprehensive, there are areas where I have questions and concerns that I hope we can discuss during today's hearing. My first area of concern is the creation of what seems to be a very top-heavy bureaucracy. According to initial estimates, the Space Force will be a military service of approximately 16,500 people. Roughly 1,000 personnel will serve in headquarters positions. Presently, the smallest force is the Marine Corps, with a total force of 246,000 military and civilian personnel and a headquarters staff of 1,200. This Space Force would be in the Department of the Air Force, similar to the Navy Marine Corps model. However, this proposal creates an Undersecretary of the Air Force for Space, whereas the Marine Corps does not have a separate Undersecretary. The proposal also creates two new four-star general officers in Space Force, one for Chief of Staff and the other for the Vice Chief of Staff of the Space Force. The Chief of Staff of the Space Force would be a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I hope our witnesses will explain why the Space Force requires a separate and dedicated Undersecretary, unlike the Marine Corps, and whether such a top-heavy bureaucracy is necessary for such a small fighting force. The Department states that a new military service will significantly increase focus in leadership, expertise, personnel, and culture. With regard to the personnel actions requested, I have some concerns that this proposal may actually have the opposite effect. Of the 16,500 members of this force, 10,500 would be active-duty service members almost exclusively from the Air Force, and a significant number of Space Force general officers would be drawn largely from the Air Force. Therefore, the future pool of officers from which the Space Force would grow field grade and general officers would be small compared to other services and predominantly from one service. This raises questions about the depth, breadth, diversity, and long-term quality of the officer corps. While predominantly made up of Air Force personnel, the proposal seeks to consolidate much of the space activities of the other services into Space Force. The Department is specifically requesting authority for the Secretary of Defense to transfer military and civilian personnel both voluntarily and involuntarily, and their associated budgets and billets to the Space Force. While it is possible all these transfers could be done voluntarily, I believe that scenario is highly unlikely. The connection a service member has to their individual military branch is often deeply rooted and a part of their identity. Furthermore, the Department has not yet decided on what role the Guard and Reserve will play in this new service. This proposal would authorize a new civilian personnel system exclusive to the Space Force that would be exempted from the statutory rules and protections applicable to most other federal employees, including anti-discrimination laws and whistleblower protections. Most notably, the proposal would create a statutory exemption from collective bargaining rights for this workforce and would authorize the Department to involuntarily transfer civilian employees, stripping them of their collective bargaining rights in the process. The Department's initial cost estimate for Space Force in FY20 is $72 million. However, the Department has provided only notional budget numbers for out-of-year budgets, with an estimate the Space Force will require approximately $1.6 billion over the FYDP based on a flat $500 million recurring cost for personnel. It is highly unlikely that the bureaucracy of the Space Force will remain flat over time. I think providing DoD with wide legislative authority to create a new bureaucracy without more robust budget details is risky. On a final point, the National Reconnaissance Office is responsible for our nation's intelligence collection in space. It is a joint organization between DoD and the intelligence community. Clearly, it will play a critical role in space as a warfighting domain, yet it is not yet part of this proposal in any way. I understand there are difficult issues to address in both the administration and Congress on any changes to the status quo, but I'm interested why this obvious seam in the organization of space was not addressed, and I'm interested in hearing from the witnesses on this issue. Again, the threats we face in space are real and clear. They require action. I commend the administration and the Department for taking such action, and we will consider this issue very, very carefully. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Reed. Well, we have 4 witnesses. All 4 will have opening statements, and we'll ask you to try to keep your opening statement down around 5 minutes, because we have a lot of members here, and we're going to have 6-minute rounds, so it's going to take a while. So we'll start with you, General Dunford. You're recognized.
Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to join Secretary Shanahan, Secretary Wilson, and General Hyten here today. Last month, I testified before you that China and Russia have developed capabilities to contest our ability to operate across all domains. This includes space, which is now a fully contested warfighting domain, along with sea, air, land, and cyberspace. As you know, we have conducted joint military net assessments each of the last 2 years to determine our readiness to execute the national defense and military strategies. At the unclassified level, our assessment includes several observations that are relevant to our discussion this morning and highlight that our competitive advantage in space has eroded. China and Russia have taken significant steps to challenge our traditional dominance in space. They have reorganized their armed forces and developed robust space capabilities to include space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. These steps provide the ability to more effectively target U.S. and allied forces. China and Russia are also capable of searching, tracking, and characterizing satellites in all Earth orbits in support of space and counter-space operations. Their counter-space capabilities include jamming, cyber operations, directed energy weapons, on-orbit capabilities, and ground-based anti-satellite missiles. China and Russia clearly recognize the implications of space from both an economic and a warfighting perspective, and as a result, they are adapting. As Secretary Shanahan has in his written statement, Secretary Wilson has addressed, and both the chairman and the ranking member have mentioned, space is no longer a sanctuary. Traditionally, the Air Force has been the principal driver of our efforts in space. And because of airmen like John Hyten, who joins us here today, our capabilities today are second to none. But our current organizational construct was developed before space was a contested domain. As a result of our analysis over the last few years, I have become convinced that we need change to maintain our competitive edge. In the past, we have often effected change in the wake of failure. Today, we have an opportunity, and I would argue an imperative, to change based on our ability to anticipate. We have an opportunity to look to the future and posture ourselves to seize and hold the high ground of space. We've already acted to establish United States Space Command, which will ensure we can most effectively operate in and from space. Taking the next step to create a Space Force will allow us to develop and maintain a singular focus on developing the people, the capabilities, the doctrine, and the culture we'll need to maintain our competitive advantage in space. Together, I believe these steps will accelerate our efforts to develop, field, and operate the capabilities we'll need for joint warfighting in the future. Thank you, Chairman, and I look forward to taking questions.
Thank you, General. Secretary Shanahan.
Great. Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of the Department of Defense's U.S. Space Force proposal. Before we begin, let me pay my respects to the families of the U.S. Marines we lost this week in Afghanistan. While we will discuss elements of national security here today, we know it is America's young men and women who ultimately deliver that security for us and our families each and every day. Let me open my comments on the Space Force by expressing my admiration for our U.S. Air Force. Because of our airmen and Secretary Wilson's leadership in particular, we are the best in space. This proposal is about maintaining the margin of dominance they have given us and accelerating the capabilities we need in this increasingly competitive domain. Establishing the Space Force within the Air Force lets us do just that. It is all the more vital now because our $19 trillion economy, our American way of life, and our American way of war all depend on space. 16 months ago, at your direction, in the FY 2018 NDAA, I began a review to, quote, identify a recommended organizational and management structure for the national security space components, end quote. We are here to respond to that direction, to address the problems Congress, multiple bipartisan commissions, the GAO, and others have all characterized. DoD's space efforts are disaggregated, resulting in a slow, bureaucratic approach. Today, DoD has 5 Senate-confirmed officials who are responsible for more than 10 organizations developing bespoke space capabilities in a very federated fashion, failing to integrate across DoD and to capture the cost synergies of standards. The current approach has served its purpose. We are at an inflection point. Threats are increasing, and the importance of and the opportunities in space are growing. Both China and Russia have weaponized space with the intent to hold American capabilities at risk. Every member of this committee has access to the classified threat picture, but the bottom line is the next major conflict may be won or lost in space. At the same time, an explosion in commercial space innovation is adding thousands of satellites and a new range of capabilities, unlocking $1 trillion in economic opportunity. There is widespread agreement the status quo is not sufficient. Change is required to stay ahead. Approached correctly, this is an opportunity for a generational improvement. Future space capabilities should be system engineered from the start to include launch, commercial innovation, the network, the satellite, the ground segment, user equipment, and cybersecurity. Our military is organized around physical domains, Army on land, Navy on sea, Air Force in the air. Given the significant change confronting us, we now need a military service dedicated to space. Instead of coordinating across more than 10 organizations, we will consolidate and concentrate into the Space Force so that we have clear lines of accountability and responsibility. 2 elements of the Space Force, organized, train, and equip mission, are worth elaborating on. First, today's space personnel go through a professional military education system focused on air, land, or sea. Space is an add-on. The Space Force will build a professional development system that recruits technical talent, educating our people in space from the beginning to produce the quantity and quality of leaders we need. Second, organizing and equipping includes force design and force development. This means understanding the domain, the technology, and warfare deeply enough to design and deliver future capabilities, ensuring space power today and in the future. The Space Force has 2 related components. First, a unified combatant command for space with a full-time commander focused on space operations. Second, the Space Development Agency will develop and deliver the next generation of space-based communications and Earth observation, while existing organizations continue current efforts. The status quo is not sufficient. We need to outpace threats in space, not simply keep up with them. Because our current system isn't organized to move fast enough, the Space Force will consolidate, elevate, and focus our efforts for results. Our partnership with Congress is critical. Our proposal responds to your FY18 NDAA direction, and we stand ready to work with you and resolve any questions or details. We ask your support in making the strategic initiative to establish the U.S. Space Force in FY 2020 NDAA. America has enduring interests in space, and just as the U.S. Navy ensures freedom of navigation of the seas, America's Space Force must now ensure the freedom to navigate the stars. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Secretary Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and Ranking Member Reid and this committee for this hearing and for your service. I would just highlight a couple of points very briefly in addition to what's already been said. The United States is the best in the world at space, and our adversaries know it. And they are seeking to develop the capability to deny us the use of space in crisis or in war. Our responsibility is to make sure that doesn't happen. Second, I would say that it is absolutely imperative that we change the system of acquisition that is modeled more for the Cold War. We have to buy things faster and smarter. The authorities that you have given to the Air Force and to the other services and to the Department of Defense over the last 3 years are in the midst of being implemented, and we are stripping time out of programs and increasing the performance of those programs. In respect to that, the on-time budget this year was absolutely critical. And the fiscal year 20 budget proposal will be the third consecutive year of double-digit percentage increases proposed by the President and I hope supported by the Congress. The third thing I would say is that the Air Force has stood up a planning cell underneath the Air Force that includes all of the services and the relevant Defense Department agencies to do the detailed planning necessary so that within 90 days of legislation, we would stand up the initial element of a Space Force. That planning cell is led by a 2-star general and, as I mentioned, includes all members of the different services. We want to be able to move out smartly when legislation is passed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. General Hyten.
Thank you very much, Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reid, distinguished committee members. It is an honor to be here today and a continuing privilege to represent the 162,000 Americans accomplishing the mission of U.S. Strategic Command. I want to begin by thanking the committee for rightly approaching space as a warfighting challenge, and I very much appreciate the President weighing in and confirming space as a warfighting domain. Now we have to make sure we're ready for that challenge. STRATCOM is a global warfighting command. Success in all our missions require us to maintain freedom of operations in space, and today, as the Secretary just said, I sit here fully confident in our nation's superiority in space. Although we have a distinct advantage today, I fear that this will not continue unless we take action immediately before our superiority begins to erode. Space is fundamental to our economic vitality and the American way of life, including how we conduct warfare. Certainly our adversaries understand this and are actively building and deploying weapons to threaten us in space. We must take these actions seriously. But as the commander of U.S. STRATCOM, I am responsible for space operations in our military today. And I've been in space my entire career. It is my passion. And as much as I'd like to focus on space, my priorities are first, strategic deterrent, second, nuclear command and control, and space can never be higher than my third priority. So the most important thing we can do in the near term is create a lean, new unified command, U.S. Space Command, separate from my command, STRATCOM, focused solely on warfighting in space. And we need a 4-star commander to do that. It's that important. The Department's already taken steps, as well as the President, to nominate General J. Raymond for this position. He is the right person for that job, and I encourage the Senate to take up his nomination as soon as possible. The second piece is to stand up a new Space Force inside the Air Force, focusing on organizing, training, and equipping forces for this Space Command and for the joint forces at large. This is the pathway that best gets us there. The President said we need a structure inside the Pentagon, focus on space all the time, inside the Air Force, and I support this model. The force needs to be streamlined from inception. I understand your concerns about inefficiencies. I believe the creation of the Space Force within the Air Force is the best way to reduce redundancies and bureaucracies by focusing on the most essential tasks. So I pledge to continue to work with the Congress to develop the most efficient warfighting organizational structure possible. So thank you again for allowing me to be here today, and I look forward to your questions as well.
Thank you, General Hyten. Now, we are going to have 6-minute rounds, and we're going to try to stay within that time frame, I tell my fellow senators. But we also, in my opening statement, I talked about, I had a couple of questions that never have been answered to my satisfaction. Forgetting about the cost thing, because we pretty much established at least an opinion as to what it's going to cost. But I have essentially the same question worded a little bit differently to have each one of our witnesses. So I'd like to ask you to respond to this question. First of all, Secretary Shanahan, I agree with when you often say the United States margin of dominance in space is diminishing. But my question to you, a direct question, is how will establishing a space force help the United States reassert its warfighting dominance? Yes, sir.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. The fix, I think what you're really speaking to is, how do we expand that margin? Our proposal addresses all of the changes that are occurring simultaneously in space. And maybe just to set up the answer, these are the significant changes we have to address. The environment is contested. We are about to modernize, for the first time in about 30 years, modernize the department. So how do we incorporate all the modernization and address this very different environment, which is a binary change from the past? And as we broke down the problem, we said the fastest way to do this, and it's all about speed to expand our margin, is to compartmentalize the problem into 3 areas. The first was make sure we have warfighting operations so that we can operate in a contested environment.
Yeah, quickly now.
The second was make sure that we have the doctrine and the training so that we can equip our forces with the right space cadre.
Okay.
And lastly, how do we acquire and develop the right system?
So you assume that we're going to do a better job with the Space Force than we're doing right now in those 3 areas. Thank you very much. Secretary Wilson, given your experience, which is vast, can you provide your assessment as to how the proposal will better organize, train, and equip Space Forces compared to the present mission of the Air Force Command today?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with General Hyten that the most important step that the Congress has already taken and the President has put into action, which is a unified combatant command for warfighting. But I do think that there is an opportunity to align defense space programs in a space force underneath the Air Force, including acquisition. And I think that that alignment will help.
Okay, that's a good answer. General Hyten, through your role as commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, you are currently the nation's most qualified expert in warfighting, in space warfighting. Can you identify, differentiate between the mission of the U.S. Space Command, a unified combatant command, and the service mission as proposed in the hearing today?
Yes, Chairman. The structure is basically built around the same structure we have in all our combatant commands. The way our military is organized is we have combatant commands that fight our forces. They fight our battles. They win our wars. They conduct strategic deterrence. All the missions are executed through our combatant commands. The new U.S. Space Command will execute the space mission through the combatant command of U.S. Space Command. But the services organize, train, and equip forces for those commands. So the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines builds, organize, trains, and equip forces for the unified combatant commanders. The Space Force will do that for the Space Command and for the Joint Force at large. Nice. That's the difference between the two.
All right. Well, that's a very good specific answer. General Dunford, you're a warfighting Marine, so you have a different perspective than some of the rest of them do on this panel. Do you believe establishing a space force will contribute to the development of a space warfighting ethos and culture that does not exist already today?
Chairman, first I'd say I think we do have a good culture in the Air Force, and again, we are the best at space. But I also believe that an organization that has a leadership team and people that are singly focused on a single core competency, that being space, will contribute to culture, but more importantly, will contribute to a focus in those areas that Secretary Shanahan, Secretary Wilson, and General Hyten highlighted.
That's good. Thank you very much, Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses. Secretary Shanahan, as I mentioned in my opening statement, basically the Space Corps is roughly 16,500 personnel. What you will create is a 1,000-person sort of overhead. That is the highest, overhead to operation ratio within the military service by a great deal. For example, the Air Force has 2,300 personnel in their headquarters and 320,000 airmen and airwomen. So how do we avoid that, and why didn't we think harder about coming with a leaner structure?
Sir, let me start with, philosophically, as we consolidate, there should be a reduction in cost. That's how I'm approaching this. The basic proposal has been formulated from an Air Force estimate based on traditional constructs. And what I'd like to do is ask Secretary Wilson to speak to how that proposal was derived.
Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the department went through this whole evaluation, we looked at a whole range of options, everything from a kind of JAG Corps, medical corps model to a completely independent standalone department, and a lot of things in between. Where we landed was a Space Force underneath the Air Force so that you don't have to duplicate all the acquisition, budgeting, finance, personnel kinds of functions, but with a member of the Joint Chiefs. Now, if somebody's going to be a Joint Chief and they're going to have the credibility in the building and be able to operate, they need to have the support of a member of the Joint Chiefs. Of the additional personnel, which I think is about 1,200, half of those are in the headquarters, which makes for a quite small headquarters for a member of the Joint Chiefs. The other half was proposed to be what is a professional development element to get after the business of developing people. So it is recruitment, professional development, doctrine center kinds of things, which is not really a headquarters element. So we did that costing, and that would be the concept.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. And Madam Secretary, your thinking about this this proposal has matured over the last couple of years. In 2017, I think you raised some opposition to a Space Force, and one of the points you made, which I thought was compelling, was you need a joint warfighting team, and this Space Force would, in your terms, be counterproductive in that respect. It would be not a joint enterprise, but essentially an Air Force enterprise, given the distribution of officers and the fact that it would be placed under the Air Force. I see a value to the jointness in everything we do, and are you concerned that we might lose that this might be more siloed out than a joint enterprise?
Senator, I think that each of our services has our own identity, but we contribute to a joint team. I think that one of the most important things in standing up a separate Space Force will be to establish a warfighting culture within that organization that's part of a joint force. One of the things that really has surprised me when I came back to the service, having been away and having served as a young officer, is just how much more joint operations really are today than they were 20 years ago when I was a young officer, and it's a real tribute to the decisions made under Goldwater-Nichols.
Again, I think this is an issue that we'll return to again and again, but there is this tension between creating a service, separate identity, and this notion of jointness, which I think you're correctly stated, emanated from Goldwater-Nichols and has been I think, a very effective way to organize our military efforts. One of the issues that has been mentioned several times, Secretary Shanahan, is the sense that, well, now we're unifying our entire effort in space on the Space Corps, but actually we have the National Reconnaissance Office, which has a great role in space, and we also have military intelligence programs that have roles in space, and they're outside this proposal. And there's, in fact, there's no, at this point, explicit sort of linkage to them other than informal communication. So are we missing something here? I think, again, the intent that we suggested in our in setting up the Unified Command would be an agency that had all services focused on space and with active participation.
Yeah.
Maybe one good analogy would be Cyber Command, active participation with the civilian agencies that are in that realm too. Can you comment?
Sure. The bias in the proposal is towards speed. The proposal we submit really represents the stakeholders that we have control of. Early discussions were with the NRO, and I continue to have discussions with Sue Gordon, principally at the technical level as we start to evolve these new architectures so that we can provision at one point in time to do the integration. Technically, I think we'll be aligned from the start. The challenge organizationally, and I think when we look at the many stakeholders, there's real work to be done there to negotiate. So we thought of it as a multi-step process that eventually there would be more alignment and integration, but not in the first phase.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Shanahan, if I could just follow up on the NRO a little bit. Are you saying that at the onset now of the Space Force, you didn't feel a need to have that included, but possibly down the line you would? Did I understand that correctly?
There is a need. It was an issue of timing. So if we could do it all concurrently, that would be ideal. I don't think we can move that quickly. So rather than delay, we said, this is what we can do immediately. Provision for that integration and realignment in time.
Will that affect the need to unify the national security space activities? Do you see that as possibly a detriment in trying to unify? We keep hearing about unification. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you don't think that will be a detriment.
Well, I'd rather do more sooner. I mean, this is really about how do we move out quick. The proposal we've put together is really a threat-driven proposal. So as quickly as we can get after the threat, we want to move. If we could do more, we'd like to do that. I think some of the organizational, this is really more about the equities of stakeholders. If we could, resolve some of those more quickly, we would, incorporate more.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Wilson and General Hyten, can you offer your views on the NRO and Space Force? Madam Secretary, if we could start with you, please.
Senator, the National Reconnaissance Office was a black program established, or secret program established between the Air Force and the CIA a long time ago. In 1992, its existence was acknowledged. But while it was a black program, it was headed by the Undersecretary of the Air Force, who was simultaneously the head of the NRO. That ended in 1992, and the NRO had its own director who was not the Undersecretary of the Air Force. There remains a very deep connection between the Air Force and the NRO. About 40% of the people in the NRO are airmen. The rest are civilians or CIA employees. So there is a deep organic connection there, and we have deepened the already close connection between military space and space elements of the intelligence community over the last several years. And that's because many of the things we'll have to protect are actually NRO assets. So deepening that connection is important. It may not require actual structural change in the organizational chart. And we'd be happy to work with you on kinds of things that might continue to deepen that already very close connection between the Air Force and the NRO.
Thank you. General Hyten, do you have anything to add?
Yes, ma'am, just a couple things. I think, first of all, we should recognize that right now the partnership between the National Reconnaissance Office and the Air Force is as strong as it's ever been. And I've been working with the National Reconnaissance Office for well over 30 years, and it's very strong. The second piece is that there's no doubt that the Space Force of the future will have to have a very strong relationship with the National Reconnaissance Office. The administration recognized this in Space Policy Directive 4. They gave us 180 days, which I think is out to the middle of August, to come back with a report that said this is how we would partner with the National Reconnaissance Office and the broader intelligence community in the future. I hope we can do that faster than August, because that partnership is very important to the future.
Okay, thank you. General Dunford, there's a tension between the desire for a streamlined effort, unified under one roof, and the desire for a joint integrated approach here. This was Admiral Rogers' concern and the reason he actually opposed the creation of a separate force for cyber. In our attempt to unify space activities, are we running the risk of creating another silo here, and we're going to surround it with a silo and we're going to distance it from other services? And how do we make sure that space is going to remain integrated?
Thanks, Senator. You know, Senator, in my assignment, what I've kind of come to learn is that the real strength of jointness is actually diversity of perspective brought by different services and organizations. But what's key is to leverage that diversity of perspective in processes that make sure we have coherent force development, force design, command and control, and planning. And I think those three areas are how we bring the joint team together. But I'm not at all concerned about a silo of space. The key is to have individuals that are singly focused on space and make sure we incorporate that perspective, that very healthy perspective, into the outcome, which is a joint force that can fight.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you. In Maine, there are certain basic principles of life. One is you don't drive on the ice after April 15th. Second is you hate the Yankees. And third is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. My impression is you all are doing a good job. We are getting the data that we need. We're getting the support from the Air Force. We're working together with the NRO and other agencies. And as I think many of you or all of you have testified, we're dominant in space right now. I understand the threat, and I understand our adversaries are moving forward, but I don't understand how adding a box to an organizational chart is going to give us some kind of qualitative military edge, to use a term that we've heard in this committee. General Hyten, I'm like the chairman. I'm genuinely undecided, although, as you can tell, I'm skeptical. I don't think it's broken. I think you're doing a good job. Why are we going to fix it?
So, Senator, I think we have been doing a good job. But we've been doing a good job in an environment where space has not been contested. What is changing is we have adversaries that are building significant capabilities that can challenge us in space.
I understand that, but I don't understand how putting a new box in an organizational chart is going to help us to respond to the new challenge that we face.
Well, there's two problems we have to fix. One, we have to have a commander focused on it all the time from an operational perspective. That's the Space Command issue we talked about.
And I agree. I think that's the answer, frankly.
And the second piece, Senator, is we have to have somebody in the Pentagon that focuses their total attention on space all the time. I've known every chief of staff of the Air Force for the last 20 or 30 years, and they've all carried space effectively into the tank. They've all cared about space. But it is a secondary issue, and as they've cared about space in the tank, the Pentagon has built a structure around them with dozens and dozens of people and organizations that are all in charge of space in many ways. I had one chief of staff tell me, well, I won't share the exact words that he told me, but it was very difficult to walk around the Pentagon and not bump into somebody who said they were in charge of space. So the goal is to put one person in charge of space, a four-star chief of staff that thought about it every time.
I understand that too, but one of the problems with this proposal is it doesn't put one person in charge of space, because we've got NRO, we've got NASA, we've got the private sector, which is very active in space. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that NRO and those other agencies, NGA, should be absorbed into this. That's the last thing I want to propose. But again, if the argument is we need a centralized authority, we don't have it here. And the other piece that I don't understand is we talk about a space force. That implies people. Nobody's going to go up and fight in space. We're not talking about soldiers here. We're talking about acquisition, design, and placement of hardware. And that's an important function, but I just don't understand why this has to be in a particular special box. I think Space Command makes sense. I understand that. But to create a new bureaucracy that's going to cost us $500 million a year, I've got to be convinced that there's some incremental value there. Mr. Secretary, you want to tackle that?
I'd love to. Thank you. If the environment were going to be the same as it is today going forward, I'd say don't fix it. I've studied this problem for 18 months, so it's not as though someone passed me a report. I've spent a lot of time on this subject, and the focus has been what is changing, and do we have the capacity and the ability to make that change? And when I break the problem down, the first is how do we set up Space Command so we have operations that now can compete in a contested environment? So that was one problem, and you need a dedicated leader whose attention is that.
But isn't that the combatant commander of the Space Command?
Correct. So that's one. Then the second piece, and this is where I think you were headed, is why does that new box called the Space Force create a lot of value? There's two major changes that we have to get after. One is how do we professionalize the generation of this cadre of space specialists? Today, it isn't a formal training and development program, a recruiting program.
But again, couldn't that take place in the context of the Space Command? It's a combatant command. It's going to have personnel and mission.
It could, and this is what the Space Force is intended: man, train, and equip like the other services. The equipping part is the other major component here. So as we look to modernize across the department, and this is an area where the department has struggled over time, and this is the most significant modernization in 30 years. Do we have the bandwidth and capacity, the focus and the accountability to drive that? And that's what this really gets after, so that when we do modernize, we execute to the schedule, we execute to the budget, but more importantly, we deliver the technical capability at a department whole, not by service.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Cotton.
Thank you for your appearance today and for your work on this very important problem. I want to share the sentiments of several members of this committee to say that space is unfortunately now a contested domain, and our enemies are putting weapons in space and they're targeting our assets in space, and that we don't really get a choice to whether we want to fight in space. We only get a choice of whether we want to win or lose in space. I know you've all put a lot of effort into thinking through that problem, as do the members of this committee. I think you'll see it's not really a partisan matter either. But it's a major question, and I think we're all committed to getting it right, not getting it fast. I do want to continue on the line of questioning that Senator King started, and I want to start with your perspective on this, General Hyten, as a combatant commander. You said, rightly so, that space can never be more than your third priority, given your priorities of our nuclear strategic forces. You can imagine a world in which those nuclear strategic forces would have been their own service, where we would have put our missiles and our ballistic missile submarines and our strategic bombers, in addition to our command and control functions, into a separate nuclear forces, if you will. We didn't do that. We have strategic command to do that. Can you explain why we need to put all space assets, space forces into a separate service as opposed to a combatant command?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator. When you look back at the history of our nuclear forces, the three basic capabilities are the submarine-launched ballistic missiles, the intercontinental ballistic missiles, the ICBMs, and the bombers. And if you look at how those systems operate, the submarine clearly operates in the maritime domain. The bombers and the ICBMs operate in the air domain. And so the expertise you need to operate those weapon systems come from the domain expertise you achieve from the Air Force and from the Navy. When you look at the space capabilities that we operate, satellites, rockets to get us into space, the capabilities there require expertise in the space domain. That's the difference between the legacy of Strategic Command, which then took domain-focused capabilities and put it together into one unified command, and a Space Force that will take another domain capability together and put it into another unified command.
Those capabilities, though, I mean, to me, they do seem pretty Air Force-centric. They don't, I mean, I understand, and I see General Dunford looking at me, that the Marine Corps and the Army uses space assets a lot to fight. It's critical to our way of fighting. But, you know, unless, as Senator King said, we're going to have a large number of actual soldiers in space fighting, and they need a different set of skills. This is primarily going to be about technology and acquisitions and so forth. So I think what a lot of us on the committee are trying to figure out is what's the incremental advantage of having a separate Space Force like the Marine Corps is to the Navy within the Air Force, as opposed to, say, the Air Force having the training and equipping function that the five services have for combatant command like yours, for the geographical commands and, you know, the Central Command or European Command or so forth. Secretary Wilson, that may be a question for you to take.
Thank you, Senator. I would just add one thing to what General Hyten mentioned, which is the importance of the development of space professionals. And I think that that's an important thing for the committee to consider, particularly the potential advantage of separating out promotions for Space Force members, and particularly Space Force operators, that would be a benefit, and to be able to promote to need, rather than just take the chance that you will get the right numbers of people. That's particularly important for small career fields. And I also think that the continuing to strengthen professional development around space and space warfighting is important. Obviously, we're moving forward with this irrespective of what decision is made by the Congress and administration on formal structures. But the shift to warfighting, things like we've established the Schriever Scholars this year, which is a specific area of professional military education on space, opening undergraduate space training to allies, going to 4 months on the floor operating systems to 4 months of training in combat operations for our space operators. So that shift of a culture to warfighting and professional development is actually, it's an important element for your consideration.
Secretary Shanahan, I see you reaching for your button. You can respond if you'd like. I had one question for General Dunford before the chairman gavels me down, but if you'd like to respond.
Part of this, and I'm hoping this gets conveyed today, 5 years from now is going to look much different. And I think sometimes we look through the lens of today and we extrapolate going forward, but there's going to be literally an explosion of thousands of satellites. So you think of just the growth in space. You think about this contested environment, and then how quickly we need to be able to adapt commercial innovation, and then the Army's going to modernize their C2 system, the Navy's going to modernize their C2 system. We have all this modernization going on concurrently. So how do we organize ourselves to be able to accomplish this amount of change in an environment that's getting, increasingly dangerous? That's really what we've tried to do here, so we could dedicate the skill and the resources to be able to move quickly instead of bureaucratically trying to organize ourselves across so many different organizations.
General Dunford, you look like you're about to push your button. Do you want to? Well, I think the chairman's going to gavel me down. I will say this, though, before my time expires. Bob Gates, who I think is one of the finest secretaries of defense that we've had, wrote in his most recent book, Passion for Leadership, that normally when you face a bureaucratic challenge, moving boxes around is not the right solution. That doesn't mean it's the wrong solution here, but he said that normally what you need is a cultural change from your leadership. Whatever happens in this year's National Defense Authorization Act, I want to commend you, Secretary Shanahan, General Dunford, Secretary Wilson, General Hyten, for the cultural change you've driven inside the department to recognize that we need to significantly increase the level of our capabilities in space, given what we face in Russia and China, because your leadership on this has been very strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all of your testimony today. I just want to concur with what I'm hearing from my colleagues. I don't think there's any disagreement from folks in this committee that space is something that we need to focus a great deal on, that it is now a contested domain in ways that simply didn't exist in the past, and we need to do a better job of coordinating and integrating space into our overall defense strategy. But I think our question is that this approach that we're looking at is just going to add a whole lot more cost. At a time when the Department of Defense needs to be a whole lot more nimble, has to be a whole lot more innovative, and has to be able to do more with less, because we can't just keep throwing money after dollars when there's so many other needs that we have in our economy here, that I would like to have folks coming to the committee saying, we can do this and we can do it more efficiently and we can have more lethality and we'll be able to defend American interest and do it in a cost-effective way. And I'm not hearing that. And Secretary Wilson, I'm going to, I hate doing this, but I think it's important because I think you said this best of anyone. In 2017, after a meeting with the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee talking about the Space Force, you said, quote, "The Pentagon is complicated enough. This will make it more complex, add more boxes to the organization chart, and cost more money. If I had more money, I would put it into lethality, not bureaucracy." Secretary Wilson, I think that's profound. I agree. The Air Force Chief of Staff went a step further and stated, quote, "If you're saying the word separate and space in the same sentence, I would offer you're moving in the wrong direction. That's why the Secretary and I are focused on how we integrate space. Every mission that we perform in the U.S. military is dependent on space. Now is not the time to build seams and segregate and separate. It's time to integrate." And I couldn't agree more with those statements. I haven't heard any kind of refuting those very strong statements. And if I think about the growth of bureaucracy, all we have to do is look at the past of agencies. And inevitably, folks come and say, we're going to do this efficiently and it's going to be different this time. I'm the ranking member on Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, which of course oversees the Department of Homeland Security. And when we stood up that department, I mean, just look at what has happened in that department over the years. Since 2005, the DHS's Department Management Operations staff responsible for functions including legislative affairs, public affairs, general counsel, has grown at a very large rate. What started at 723 employees now is close to 2,600 employees. Bureaucratic organizations always grow. I've never seen a bureaucratic organization that actually shrinks, and this one is particularly rank-heavy, which is usually has its own bureaucracy that comes as ranks increase. And essentially, the proposal would have 2 4-star generals and an undersecretary in charge of the organization the size of a Marine Expeditionary Brigade, which is usually commanded, as you know, General Dunford, by a brigadier general who is conducting operations in both the air and land domains, very complex, contested environments. And we're going to be adding an incredible number of folks in what is being done efficiently in other places around the Department of Defense now. So my question is, what would happen to the end strength of the existing services if personnel are transferred to the Space Force? Would the Air Force, Navy, and Army backfill those positions, or are we looking to reduce the end strengths of those forces as we create this new bureaucracy? Secretary Shanahan?
No, we would not backfill the end strength. So
So-
this would be net zero.
So we would see a reduction in those other areas because
Yes.
we're
Yes.
moving.
Yes.
I also, we talked about, and Senator Reid brought it up, which I think is important, is the jointness factor. And that certainly was one of the important and I think paramount achievements of Goldwater-Nichols, to make sure that we're fighting jointly. And that's why I concur with some of the comments I've heard from my colleagues on having the joint command structure. But if the creation of the Space Force is approved and we consolidate all of the service space equities into one branch, the unified U.S. Space Command will only have one service as a force provider, is my understanding. General Dunford, how does this proposal fit into Goldwater-Nichols, and how do you propose senior officers in the Space Force would broaden and gain joint experience if we're consolidating all space equities into a single service providing force for a single functional combatant command?
No, Senator, I think it's a great question. And for clarity, I would envision that each of the services would still have expertise at the staff planning level to employ space capabilities, and then also the necessary tools to take advantage of space. So ground systems, staff planners, and those kind of things would be in the other services. But Senator, from where I sit now, particularly as a former Joint Force Commander operational, and as the chairman, I mentioned a minute ago, the diversity of perspective actually brings strength to the joint force. So I don't have concerns about Space Command being a cylinder of excellence, if you will, because it's largely a single service. I think it's imperative on the joint force to make sure that in force development, force design, in command and control and our planning, we leverage that diversity that each of the services brings. My perspective is, and I was probably where many members of the committee are today, 2 years ago, skeptical that we're moving in the right direction. And at the end of the day, I asked the question, we have a space domain now. It is a warfighting domain. What is the optimal organizational construct to make sure that we're positioned to fight in space? And that's where I've landed now on the Space Force. And so I do believe that the framework within which we develop joint capabilities will allow us to leverage both Space Command, the operational element here, as well as Space Force, the train, organize, and equip organization.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me just say to all of you, thank you for your service to our country. I most certainly appreciate all of the expertise that you provide. And once again, Secretary Wilson, it has been truly an honor and a privilege to be able to work with you, and we're going to miss you. I have to share with you all, I guess I'm open-minded as to whether or not this is a good idea or not. And at the same time, I think all of us have an obligation to come in a sense, to be skeptical, because what we have right now appears to, as you've all indicated, we have the best with regards to our approach right now to space compared to our near-peer competitors. And so what we're trying to do is to make improvements for the long term based upon the issues that we see that we're not able to do as well as we would like to. I see the Air Force, though, in many ways, having learned a lot from previous projects and so forth. The Air Force right now has a B-21 project, which is not only on time, it's on budget. It would appear to me that there are acquisition processes within the Air Force right now that are showing improvement, that we're actually seeing that work its way through. And I'm wondering what it is within the space processes that would be different, and why it is that space is a challenge. I'm also trying to figure out what happens when we start talking about this new bureaucracy. We've actually considered the fact that we want to, if I'm understanding this, that we would actually have a general officer, a chief of staff who would be a 4-star, responsible for the Space Force, but we would also have another individual who would serve as commander of the U.S. Space Command. Let me just start with this. Any possibility that we could follow the same guidelines as we found within Cybercom, where we have a dual-hatted position? Has that been considered as one way to perhaps promote some efficiencies in this proposal? I'll start with Secretary Shanahan, and if you'd like to pass that off, you're welcome to, sir.
No, let me start there and add on to your comments about the B-21. The first is, let's say we did have the dual hat, and you just look at the work that individual would be accountable to deliver. It's too much work. When I just look at it, and if it was General Raymond, it would be too much work given what's taking place across the department. So it's just a bandwidth. I would offer, if we were to compare acquisition processes to the B-21, in our situation, we have the opportunity to take advantage of innovation that's taking place in the commercial sector. And the B-21 is really, indigenous. We're going to have to make changes to our acquisition processes in order to be able to take advantage of all of this new technology and innovation.
Would not a Space Force have the same unfortunate bureaucratic problems that the Air Force has to deal with today?
That was the nature of the Space Development Agency. Carve the development portion out so that we can address the bureaucratic red tape of acquisition, so we can really leverage the commercial innovation, and the fact that how we design is going to be fundamentally different because it's now a contested environment.
This wouldn't be the first time that we made a change like this. I mean, this has gone through processes in the past. There is no such thing as a perfect layout. Mm-hmm. The one we have today is clearly not perfect. Mm-hmm. It could be improved upon. And General Dunford, I see that you were looking over as though you may have something to add to that
particular thought.
Senator, do you mind if I address the dual hat issue?
Yes, sir.
So
Go ahead.
when I look at General Nakasone, the benefit of the dual hat arrangement up there is he's able to combine intelligence with cyber capabilities to quickly execute operations. And we saw, combined with authorities, the benefit and the power of that last fall in protecting our democracy. In the case of Space Command and Space Force, Space Command will be singularly focused on integrating a joint force for operations, so integrating capabilities and integrating across capabilities to conduct operations. The four-star with Space Force really is in a train, organized, and equipped world, and I see the benefit of having somebody singularly focused on developing the human capital, the doctrine, the capabilities, and the culture of a Space Force. But that same individual, I don't believe, can also be the one we count on day-to-day to conduct operations.
Let me just ask a couple of real quick questions. General Hyten, I'm going to come right to you with this because clearly you have a number of these items under your responsibility right now. But let me just run this by. And satellites are going to be separate right now in terms of maintaining the NRO separate, number one. Number two, what about hypersonics? Whose role is this going to play and how does that fit into this whole process? Are we going to find that under a Space Force or a Space Command, or is that going to remain separated out?
Well, you'll organize the structure of the weapons that we're building and the capabilities that we're building based on the organization with the best expertise. I think the Space Force structure will likely build the sensors that will see hypersonics, but I think the other services will more likely build the hypersonic capabilities because they will operate in their domains. The hypersonic capabilities we're talking about right now are not space capabilities. They operate from the sea, from the land, from the air, through the air, and so that structure makes sense to go through there. If I could just build on a little bit to the previous discussion, though, because I think it's important for the committee to understand that, well, just look at the uniform I'm wearing. I am an airman at heart. When I bleed blue. I love my Air Force, and I love the history of the Air Force in space. I mean, the term aerospace was created at this committee in 1958 by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force to talk about the integration of air and space. I love that background, but every physical domain we have, when it becomes contested, we create a military service to deal with that. So we're going to have a Space Force someday. I think what the committee has to decide is when is that going to happen? And I think now is the time to go to what Chairman said. You want to get ahead of the problem, not trail it, not come in the response to a catastrophe, get ahead of the problem. But I hope everybody understands I love the uniform that I wear.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. I think you can understand, or I hope you can understand, that while this committee seems to be open to this idea, we're still seeing a lot of generalities after being studied for a while, and we're having a hard time grasping. Candidly, unlike some colleagues, my needle may be a little bit more inclined to create a Space Force, but I'm still got questions. For instance, Secretary Shanahan and General Dunford, there was a statement that you issued that said, current service-specific entities that provide global space capabilities would become part of the U.S. Space Force. For example, the Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center, the Navy Mobile User Objective System, and the Army's operations of wide and narrow band global satellite communications all become part of the Space Force. But then you go on to say, as necessary, DoD components would retain organic space capabilities uniquely required to support the core mission of that military service or defense agency. So what exactly would and wouldn't become part of the Space Force? I mean, do you have a list of the entities that would have, and do we have that list, or can you get that list to us? Go ahead, General.
Senator, I can start and just give you an example. In my own service, the Marine Corps, we don't have space capabilities in the Marine Corps. We do have personnel that are trained in capabilities to take advantage of space. And so where I see us going is that the preponderance of space capability would be in that single service, the Space Force. But each of the services, because space is integral to their warfighting capability, is going to have to have expertise inside those services to make sure that space is properly integrated into their warfighting capability. And then they're going to have some capabilities to take advantage of space, ground systems and so forth. But this would move, on order of 95% plus of the capabilities in the Department of Space into a single force. So that what would be residual in the other services would be minimal, and it would be designed specifically and only to make sure they can take advantage of space.
Okay. Secretary, you want to add anything to that?
No, absolutely. Senator, if we can come brief you, we've done the architectural and programmatic analysis, service and agency for over the FIDEP. So I could show you where today we have 10 different organizations working on similar architectures. This is really not about the systems that we have in place. Wholesale, they stay in place, but the department is about to embark on command and control, new command and control for all the services. We have an opportunity here to have all domain command and control at the Department of Defense level. That's never been an opportunity. And why that's such a big deal, and that's what the Space Development Agency represents, is we're going to have a common ground stations, common terminals, the infrastructure that's necessary to really be able to strip out cost and be able to upgrade capability. We'll finally have a baseline that will allow us to do it. And I think this is where Senator Peters was. Where does the value come from? 10 efforts to 1. There's real cost, real schedule, real capability that gets delivered in a much more effective fashion. That's what this proposal is about. I'd trade 500 people in a heartbeat to implement this proposal. If that's where the negotiation is, I think we have a winner here. The real benefit is delivering capability at a much lower cost, and those dollars are in the billions.
All right. On a specific, just to bring it home to Alabama, is the Army Space and Missile Defense Command at Redstone Arsenal going to be part of the Space Force? Do you know?
Well,
or do you want to get back to me?
No, I actually, it depends which part, because so when we think of SMDC, some of the critical roles in the SMDC, some of that will be aligned with the Space Force as we do Army modernization. Some of the existing resources that support ongoing, I call them legacy Army operations, they'll stay in their current capacity and their current alignment.
All right. Secretary Wilson, I just kind of want to ask it in a different way, this question about the need for this. Because I've read statements of yours in the past where you have talked about the need for a Space Command versus Space Force, maybe not both. Let's put aside the fact, and I get it about acquisition. I see that, but I sometimes think that could be done within the Air Force. But let me just put it this way. Had the President of the United States not issued an order about creating this, and you have been the Secretary now for a couple of years, would this be something that you would be coming to the Senate Armed Services Committee recommending after having served 2 years as Secretary of the Air Force?
Senator, I think the President of the United States has done us a service by elevating this conversation and making the challenge we face in space a kitchen table conversation. And when I came here to be confirmed in front of you 2 years ago, I was told by a holdover from the previous administration, by the folks who were still kind of in the previous administration or holding over or whatnot, that I had to take out the words space and warfighting in the same sentence. And look at where we are today. The President has proposed, and you all have supported, 2 consecutive years of double-digit percentage increases in the space budget, and there's another one before you today in the FY20 budget. And we're having a hearing on how America needs to dominate in space. And I think we need to give him credit for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that answer, Secretary Wilson.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of our witnesses today for being here. This is obviously very important to all of us, but making sure that the structure is right is also very important. I think we've determined that it's a necessity. It's just how we establish the forces. So I hope we can get get this sorted out. I'm going to I know we've talked about this so many times over in so many different ways. We've given a lot of different examples of different types of structures of organizations within our military. I guess we need some convincing that there is a necessity for a sixth branch within our armed services. We do have United States Special Operations Command, SOCOM, and its components. They were stood up to organize, train, and equip our nation's special operators, and they were established to address a gap in our warfighting construct without standing up a separate branch of service. So with that, we have Naval Special Warfare, we have MARSOC, we have USASOC, and we've got AVSOC. All of our branches represented within SOCOM. So why is that not a great example then of what we could do for a space command instead of a space force? Could somebody address that?
I'd be happy to do that. Let me just start with, in my previous life, I did weapon system development for SOCOM, and I've done weapon systems development for space, and then also the Missile Defense Agency. So a full spectrum of different classes of engineering and different levels of complexity. The SOCOM model is very much different than what we're proposing, and that's what you're recognizing. In the SOCOM model, the very advanced engineering is actually done by the service. And in this model, it would be the same. So the advanced capability would be done by the Space Force. So there's similarity. The actual research and development that's done by SOCOM today, so today if we just looked at the budget, is about $600 million. If we look at what's in the Air Force today, it's about 11. I'm thinking it's 11 billion in acquisition. It's about 8 billion in RDT&E. It's a different scale, and the complexity of the engineering and the complication is just a different class. So I would just argue it's different missions and different scales, and I think it would be much more difficult to manage in that environment given the amount of acquisition we're going to do as a department going forward.
I understand the acquisition challenges. I would say that right now as well, we also have challenges with personnel simply to move into a space force and what those requirements might be. And Secretary, I know we had spoken just several weeks ago about maybe some of the challenges, because anytime we do stand up, even if it's a brand new unit just somewhere, you know, whether it's a company or a battalion, I mean, you're trying to field new positions. And could you address for me the challenges with pulling a lot of talent, primarily from our Air Force, but also from some of our other service branches, and the implications of what that might do to hollow out some of the other forces with that talent, and just some of the challenges we'll face in filling some of those top-heavy slots? Secretary, can you address that maybe?
Senator, with respect to the people, I think the part of this has to do with at what time scale. How do we develop our people? And then how do we gradually promote them and get them ready to take on positions of responsibility? I think you've identified one of the issues that will be one of the hard parts we're dealing with in the working group, the task force that's been set up under a two-star general to look at how do we make sure we have the right expertise, and on what time scale could that Space Force grow into a fully robust support for a member of the Joint Chiefs.
So as we're looking, and again, understanding that these are decisions that will be made along the way, but what kind of timeline will it take to fully establish a Space Force rather than a Space Command?
Senator, the concept that is in the draft working group paper that was finished by the end of March and is currently being refined is that within 90 days of passage of legislation, we would stand up the cell of a Space Force staff inside the Air Force, and then it will move on to two other phases, one to initial operating capability and then full operating capability. Though each of those phases are conditions-based, But the concept is that it would be fully operational sometime in the window of 2023, 2024 timeframe.
Okay, that sounds very fast, actually, to stand up a whole separate branch of service, but it is something that we'll continue to look at as Congress. I appreciate the input that you've all provided here today. Thank you very much.